Welcome and thank you for joining this very special IUPAC100 Global Breakfast webinar. My name is Mary Garson. I'm based in Australia and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of myself and my global co-host, Dr. Laura McConnell from the United States of America. So our presentation today on February the 12th, it's a very, very special day. It's the Global Women in Chemical Sciences Networking event, a global event which we understand today is taking place in 50 different countries, and that there are more than 200 different events worldwide. So what a fabulous response from the global women's chemistry community to sharing this special event. We welcome those of you who are listening in from around the globe, and we hope that you find this presentation useful. Now, 2019 is an important year for IUPAC because we celebrate our centenary, and we share 2019 as a very special year. Also, it's the International Year of the Periodic Table because it is 150 years ago since Dmitry Mendeleev of Russia set up the periodic table in the form in which we know it today. So this is a joint initiative of these two celebratory events. The Global Women's Breakfast is taking place, as I said, in more than 50 different countries. And we really wanted to show you the creativity and the artistic effects that many of the people who will be sharing breakfast with us today have gone to, the time and effort that they've gone into producing publicity materials for their events. What a beautiful set of images we're currently looking at on the screen. And thank you again to everybody for joining in your breakfast event. Now, today's webinar is in some ways going to be accessible to people who can't join in at a local breakfast. And we take this opportunity to show you the global web map of breakfasts that are working with us today on February the 12th. Breakfast, of course, starts in New Zealand and will move through the Asia Pacific region into Europe, into the Americas, finishing in Hawaii in about 20 hours of time after they first start in New Zealand. And as individual breakfasts come online and report in through social media, either Twitter or by email, we will be lighting up that particular breakfast. So if you get an opportunity, please check the global map during the day to see which breakfasts have actually happened or about to happen, and maybe even sign in to see the magic moment when your own particular breakfast lights up. So just moving along through the slide deck here, the topics for today's presentation are going to be to think about why young women should be considering a career in the chemical sciences and what that career progression is actually going to involve, particularly for those chemists with young families. We will also try and make some comments about diversity in the workplace, and given that this webinar is being hosted by IUPAC, I think an important question to ask is to consider the role that national and indeed international professional associations in the chemical sciences can play in assisting women chemists in their career development. Now I'd like to move to our guest speaker for today's webinar, Professor Kate Jolliffe from the University of Sydney. And on the PowerPoint file there, you'll see a very brief synopsis of Kate's background. She is a Professor of Chemistry at the University of Sydney. She's an organic chemist. Her PhD was from the University of New South Wales, which is also in Sydney, Australia. And she has international postdoctoral experience from Europe, the Netherlands, the UK, and also from the Australian National University in Canberra. She's received extensive research funding for her work, and since the mid-2000s, she has been an academic at the University of Sydney, including most recently as the head of school. So welcome, Kate, to the webinar today. Thank you for giving up your valuable time for us. I want to start off by asking you about why you chose to become a chemist, because I read recently that you said that at the age of 18 you wanted to be a chef. a cook, a chef. So please tell me how this changed and reflect on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks so much for the invitation to join you in this webinar for this great breakfast. So yes, when I was 18, or probably slightly earlier than that, I wanted to be a chef. I did work experience in a test kitchen, and I had worked for some time as in a part-time position in a catering business. When I was 17, I finished school and then was made a Rotary exchange student and went to Denmark for a year, where I learnt Danish and deferred my university degree for a year. I had enrolled in science, thinking that that was something that I might be interested in doing, thinking that I probably wasn't sure whether I was going to actually go to university or train as a chef, as an apprentice. But after I came back from Denmark, effectively the path of least resistance was to just go into the university degree that I had deferred the year before. And essentially, that's where I really started to love chemistry and decided that that was what was going to be my career. But I certainly didn't know that when I started first year university.
It's interesting because, in fact, having described you as an organic chemist, there are quite a lot of parallels between a career in being a chef and cooking recipes for organic chemistry. Now, look, I'm pleased that you mentioned that you spent some time overseas, that you had that time in Denmark, and that you have a second language. Because, of course, we have to remember that we've got a very international audience listening in to this particular webinar. So keeping that international perspective in mind, tell me a little bit more about why you think that young women should consider a career in science, and particularly in the chemical sciences.
So I think just thinking about chemistry itself and the chemical sciences, so many of the global problems facing the world today actually have solutions that are rooted in science, and many of them have a chemical input. Feeding the world's population, providing clean water for everybody, finding new drugs that are going to cure diseases that currently kill thousands, if not millions of people, all have chemistry as part of their solution. And I think that that's a really important factor in choosing a career. Thinking about what you can do to help solve these global challenges is something that's really important. In terms of the international perspective, I've found that having an academic career in chemistry in particular has really enabled me to develop as a person and to learn about other cultures, to visit other countries, to work in those other countries for periods of time. And that's something that I really enjoy. And I think it also means that you learn a lot about other people as well.
Let's think a little bit about the many young people who are going to be listening to watching the webinar today. So if a young woman asked you for some advice about how to progress her career in chemistry, and in particular with the issue of family being there front and center, what would you like to tell her?
I'm going to preface my answer to this by saying straight out that I personally don't have children, so I may not be the best person to answer this question if that's what you're thinking about. But I've certainly observed many colleagues and also students and postdoctoral fellows who've worked with me as they've developed their families alongside their careers. I think the thing to remember is that nothing is impossible. Things may be difficult, but they're certainly not impossible. And you shouldn't let the fact that you want to have a family put off whatever career you want to have as well. That's really the key issue. You'll need to have great time management skills. That's probably key.
And I think we might say organisational management skills as well. Perhaps at this point we could point out that, of course, many countries have good policies that enable women to take time out of the workforce or to come back in part-time to facilitate women being able to maintain a career. But of course, globally, this is better developed in some countries than in others. And indeed, if we think about individual institutions, we're aware that some organisations have what we might call particularly family-friendly policies. For example, not starting meetings before 9 o'clock in the morning, scheduling seminars at times, but not at lunchtime, for example. Whereas in other communities, these family-friendly policies are less well developed. So I'm like you in as much as I don't have family, but I've noticed that the women around me who do have family are very good at organising, as you say, their time and managing that important work-life balance. Now, one of the things that we thought we should be talking about today was the role of professional societies, both national and international, in facilitating the career development of young people. And you and I are both members of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute. So I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about their gender inclusive policies and actually also in what ways you feel that national and international professional associations can work in this area?
Yes, so I think this is actually a really important contribution that our international and national societies can make. It's only been the last few years really that things have started to change in this regard. Many of these institutions have developed inclusivity policies, diversity policies, the Royal Australian Chemical Institute being one of those. And as an example of what they're doing in that space, I think if you're organising a conference now, you need to be aware that your organising committee needs to have at least 40% female versus male participants. And your speaker list needs to have approximately 35% female versus male participants at each level. And this is now a requirement to get RACI support for organising a conference. Many other societies around the globe are doing similar things. I think in particular, I'm a member of the Royal Society of Chemistry as well in the UK, and they're working very hard at the moment, I think, to try and address these issues and try and make the workplace better for everybody, not just for women. Their recent report, Breaking Down Barriers, is, I think, a really great start in that regard.
That's right, I agree with you. It's a really excellent report, and I think one of the important things it states when it addresses the three key issues that are barriers for women in the chemical sciences is it points out that these are not solely issues facing women, but that they disproportionately affect women over others. You've been a member of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute and also the Royal Society of Chemistry. What personal benefits has being part of that network given to you during the development of your career? I mean, would you encourage other women to join their national professional associations?
Absolutely. I think that being part of your national association generally means that you participate in events that association runs. And in the case of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute, that's frequently conferences on particular areas of chemistry. And those conferences are where you form networks. The first conference I went to was as an honours student. And I met people at that conference who I still talk to today, who are friends of mine today, and who I even collaborate with today. And so this is a really important part of forming networks that will help support you in developing your career. Also, there are other groups and interest groups that many of these societies run, things like women in chemistry groups that you can participate in and start to make suggestions for improvements. For how things are run and how things happen in various places that will help you and future generations of chemists, not just female chemists.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much for that. I think I agree with you. I mean, I found, the audience can probably tell, I come from England originally too. I was a member of the Royal Society of Chemistry. As soon as I came to Australia, I immediately joined the Royal Australian Chemical Institute, and I found it gave me an image, a representation here, and was a way of opening doors to the networks that I needed to establish my career in a second community. Now, a question that I'm frequently asked, and actually I'll tell you in advance that it sometimes floors me, so I hope that I don't floor you when I ask you this. Men often ask me, if I were to do more to be supporting the women who are working in my workplace and to bring about better diversity, what would be your top 3 tips for me? That's a difficult question, so I'm interested to know whether you've thought about this.
It is indeed an interesting question, and I think interesting that men feel like they need to ask women what
it's, I say straight away, what a great question.
So I think there are a number of things. I'm not sure I've got 3. I might even have 4. There are a number of things that will help, and absolutely the first one is to simply call out bad behaviour when you see it. Both men and women need to be doing this. If bad behaviour is not called out, if bullying, if people actually treating people differently because of their diversity is not called out, then it continues and it gets worse. So I think that that's absolutely number 1 on my list. Number 2 on my list is probably just to think about next time nominations come up for promotions, for awards, think about nominating a female. Don't go to the most obvious candidate who's probably male, but actually think about nominating a female and tell them that you're going to do that. That little bit of encouragement is probably all it takes to make them feel like they might actually be worth, being nominated for an award. And that's definitely an issue for many women. They just feel like they can't put themselves forward. They won't talk to men and say, please nominate me for this award. They'll wait to be asked. So ask them.
Think outside the box, in other words, think outside your own existing networks. What about academic workloads? I think that would be one of my top 3 tips, to pay very careful attention to workload balance, particularly for people in the early and indeed even the mid-career phase, particularly if they have young families.
Definitely. I think those are probably my other 2 tips out of my top 4 rather than 3 relate to that issue. So one is simply to be flexible. If you have people working for you who ask to take maternity leave, who ask to work part-time, then be flexible and understand that there are reasons for that and do it. And if you're working in a country that allows you to take paternal leave or family leave, parental leave, then take that leave and show support for actually being a carer and a leave taker, rather than simply assuming that your female colleagues or your wife is going to do that for you. Mm. And then the other side of that is really in terms of looking at workloads across particularly in an academic setting, is to think about, not just saying no to the jobs that normally end up being done by females. Think about what that impact will have on your female colleagues, and maybe just take one of those on now and then to lighten the load on your female colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, it's curious really that I've worked at a number of academic institutions now, and it always seems to be that it's the women academics who take on the more nurturing, caring, the teaching responsibility roles. And of course, these are very, very important, particularly if we're going to encourage more women undergraduates to consider the chemical sciences as a career. But they take up significant time and they can actually be very emotionally draining. So have you got any suggestions about how we make sure that those roles are shared equitably? I mean, you've been a head of school, so I'm sure that you've thought about this in the past.
Yes, so my first suggestion is for anybody in these sorts of settings to learn how to say no. That's really important. Don't just keep saying yes when people ask if you'll do another job. And sometimes it takes you pointing out the fact that the man down the hallway has been there much longer than you have and hasn't actually had one of those roles. In fact, it's fairly frequent that this just hasn't been thought about before. So pointing that out is also particularly important.
Yeah, I think it's particularly important to match everybody, men and women, up to what are their obvious strengths. Some people will downplay their strengths to try and avoid a particular position, but a careful matching up of responsibilities with strengths, communication, organisation, I think, can pay dividends for an organisation. Now, as we move towards the end of the webinar, and I'll just let you know that I want to finish by just asking a little bit about what you do outside of chemistry, but but before we get to that, we are thinking, of course, about trying to encourage many women worldwide to consider chemistry as their future career, particularly in the second century of IUPAC. So is there anything else that you would like to add as a message to the next generation of women chemists?
I think that the key message for me is that chemistry is fun. You need to do something you enjoy. So if you don't enjoy chemistry, it's probably not for you. But if you do enjoy it, then nothing, particularly not your gender, should get in the way of being able to do what you love. And I think that you need to build up your networks, both male and female, join those international societies to help you do that. And that will also make your career much more interesting. The key for me is that you really do need to enjoy what you do and find something that makes you happy and do that. Otherwise, there's really no point.
Yeah, so Kate, at the start of this conversation, we had a discussion about the fact that you were thinking about becoming a chef. So I imagine that means that you really enjoy cooking as a way of relaxation after hours. But do you, and it's also would be apparent to me that you enjoy travel, because I think that every professional chemist gets to travel as part of their job. Many professional chemists get to travel as part of their job, and I can see you're nodding. Do you have other activities that you do outside of work to keep that work-life balance?
Absolutely. So I very much, I'm Australian. I love going to the beach. On a sunny weekend, you'll find me at a beach reading a book. It might be a trashy novel. It might be serious literature, something that doesn't involve chemistry to get my mind off work. That's probably my biggest thing. But I also, I do yoga classes. I do Pilates classes, things to keep me fit as well. I think it's really important to get a bit of exercise now and then.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think a fit body, a fit mind. I do Pilates too. I don't go to the beach like you. I like to go to the mountains and the rainforest to cool off, because where I live in Brisbane, which is only 1,000 kilometres north of you, the weather is really too hot to think about going to the beach. Anyway, look, I'm at this point going to pass back to IUPAC. But before I do that, I'd really like to thank you, Kate, for joining in the conversation today and just sharing your thoughts with us. And as we move back now to the slide deck that IUPAC has prepared for us, we're looking first of all at some information about an international symposium, Women in the Periodic Table of Elements, which is taking place on yesterday, February the 11th, and today, February the 12th, in Murcia, in Spain. And part of that is going to be live streamed, as I understand it. I believe that would be that's Tuesday morning, 7:30, 8:30 a.m. They're 1 hour in front of GMT. So if you get the opportunity and you picked up on this webinar in time, please do take a look at that very important symposium, which is celebrating women and the periodic table of elements as a high-profile event of the International Year of Periodic Table in association with IUPAC. I'd very much like again to thank Kate for speaking with us today. I'd like to thank my global co-host, Laura McConnell, for putting this webinar together. We are part of IUPAC History Today. You, the audience, are part of IUPAC History because, as I said right at the beginning, we have more than 200 individual events taking place in 50 different countries. Some of those individual events have more than 200 participants. Others have very small numbers, 4 or 5 people, so that we are reaching out to a global audience, probably in excess of 5,000 women chemists on this very historic day. So thank you all very much for being part of February the 12th, Empowering Women in Chemistry. And as we move along, I'm clearly here being reminded to suggest to everybody to join us later in the year for the very last part of the celebrations of the centenary of IUPAC. In Paris in July, we have the 47th World Chemistry Congress and the 50th IUPAC General Assembly, and there will be hearty celebrations there as the community of chemists worldwide come together to celebrate the centenary of IUPAC. Thank you all so much for joining in, and I wish everybody a very special day today. I think, Kate, would you like to say goodbye?
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Mary. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and goodbye to everybody. Enjoy your breakfast.
Okay, likewise, everybody, enjoy your breakfast.